The Gentleman's Bet. Chapter 1. The Wager. The London season had begun with its usual mixture of excitement, gossip, and ruthless competition, and no ballroom hummed with more speculation than Lady Ingham's glittering assembly rooms on the first Saturday of June. The chandeliers dripped with light, the orchestra played a sprightly country dance, and the scent of roses from the conservatory drifted over the crowd like a promise. Into this shimmering scene strolled Mr. James Redcliffe, tall, dark-haired, and carrying the lazy confidence of a man well accustomed to admiration. His smile alone was enough to weaken the resolve of half the debutantes and raise the irritation of most of their mothers. He exchanged nods and brief greetings with acquaintances as he scanned the room for his friend. He found him at the refreshment table, pouring himself a glass of champagne with the air of a man deeply pleased with life. "Redcliffe," Mr. Edward Hartley said, grinning when he spotted him, "you missed the opening dance. Half the room wondered where your charming arrogance had gone." James laughed softly. "I was delayed by business." "Business?" Edward snorted. "The only business you attend to after noon involves cards, brandy, or women." James merely shrugged, unwilling to argue, though the jab was not unfair. Before he could reply, Edward's attention sharpened toward the far side of the ballroom. "Ah, look there." James followed his gaze. Standing near the French doors, her fan opening and closing with crisp rhythm, was Miss Charlotte Fairleigh, the acknowledged beauty and razor wit of the season. Her dark curls were arranged with effortless elegance, and her sky-blue gown brought out the unusual green in her eyes. Her posture was impeccable, her expression cool, and the young gentleman hanging on her every word looked both awed and mildly terrified. Charlotte Fairleigh had become a subject of fascination not merely for her fortune, though that was substantial, but for her sharp intelligence. She did not giggle. She did not blush on command. She had, in fact, sent 3 overconfident suitors fleeing this very week with nothing more than a raised brow and a well-placed remark. Edward let out a low whistle. "She is exquisite." "She is formidable," James corrected, studying her, "and she knows it." "Oh, certainly." Edward leaned closer. "And that, my friend, is precisely why I believe she is the ideal target." James frowned. "For what?" Edward's grin widened. "A wager." The word hung in the air between them, a glittering, dangerous spark. James sighed. "Hartley, no. No? You refuse before hearing the terms? That's unlike you." James took a measured sip of champagne. "Because every time you suggest anything preceded by the word wager, I end up in some kind of trouble." "This will be different," Edward promised, eyes mischievous. "Miss Fairleigh is becoming the legend of the season, untouchable, unimpressed, immune to flattery. But you—" He tapped James's shoulder. "You have a reputation for winning over the most resistant hearts." James remained silent. Edward pressed on. "A fortnight. Whoever can secure an invitation to walk with Miss Fairleigh alone in the gardens of Hyde Park, just one walk, just one, wins." James exhaled. "This is childish." "Afraid?" Edward teased lightly. "Or have you lost your charm?" James turned his head toward Charlotte again. She was laughing at something the gentleman beside her had said, though the laughter did not reach her eyes. She seemed a young woman who weighed every word offered to her, who accepted no performance at face value. She intrigued him, but Edward's game was dangerous ground. "No," James said firmly. Edward shrugged. "Very well. I suppose Miss Fairleigh is too great a challenge." The obvious provocation hit its mark. Edward knew James too well. "Fine," James snapped. "If you need your pride soothed so badly, I accept. But one condition. This is a harmless competition. No intention to compromise the lady's reputation." "Agreed," Edward said brightly. "A gentleman's bet." James nodded once, though the words settled uneasily in his stomach. Miss Charlotte Fairleigh was perfectly aware of the stir her presence caused. She had not sought it. She did not crave attention. If anything, she preferred the quiet steadiness of an afternoon spent reading in her father's library. But since her father's considerable fortune had passed to her upon his death, society had not left her in peace. Marrying her was increasingly seen as the path to financial salvation for half the young men in London. So she stood, composed and charming on the surface, as Lord Braxton prattled about his horses for what felt like an eternity. Her thoughts wandered, until she sensed eyes upon her. No, not sensed, felt. Turning slightly, she spotted Mr. James Redcliffe watching her across the room, thoughtful and assessing. She had seen him before, of course. Everyone in society had. He was known for his ease, his beauty, his effortless triumphs in social engagements. She had never seen him look quite so serious. Interesting. Their gazes held for only a moment, but something electric passed between them, subtle and startling. She thanked Lord Braxton for his compliment and excused herself under the pretence of seeking a glass of water, but inwardly she wondered. Was James Redcliffe considering approaching her? The notion made her pulse quicken for reasons she did not care to examine. As the evening wore on, James finally crossed the room toward her after observing her politely dismiss 2 more suitors. He waited until she stood alone near the conservatory, bathed in the faint glow of candlelight against glass. "Miss Fairleigh," he said, bowing with a sincerity he rarely used. She tilted her head. "Mr. Redcliffe. You appear impatient, if I may say it." Her brow arched. "Do I?" "Yes," James said. "It is the look of a clever person forced to endure dull conversation for too long." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Perhaps." He smiled. "I hope, then, that I may offer a slight improvement. Would you grant me this next dance?" She studied him for several seconds, long enough to make him feel, for the first time in years, genuinely unsure of himself. Then she placed her hand in his. "I will." As he led her to the floor, James glanced toward Edward, who raised his glass in triumph. James ignored him. For the moment their hands touched, and Charlotte's eyes lifted to his. James felt something he had not anticipated. Not triumph, not conquest, but a flicker of something dangerously close to fascination. And that, he realized as the orchestra began to play, was not part of the wager at all. Chapter 2. Turning Tides. The days that followed surprised James more than he cared to admit. He had expected Miss Fairleigh to be a diverting challenge, witty, sharp, difficult to impress. He had not expected her to unsettle him. And yet, each meeting left him wanting more. Their first conversation in Lady Ingham's garden had lasted only 10 minutes, but he had walked away replaying every word. She was observant, quick, not given to meaningless sentiments. When he spoke, she listened fully. When she spoke, her mind leapt from topic to topic with confidence and clarity. He found himself scanning invitation lists for her name with uncharacteristic anticipation. Charlotte, for her part, found herself increasingly irritated with her own thoughts. Mr. Redcliffe had a reputation she had always disapproved of. A rake, a charmer, a man who floated through society with no intention beyond amusement. She had always avoided men of that sort. Yet he spoke to her with unexpected earnestness. He looked at her as though he saw beyond the surface, and he made her heart quicken, which was frankly inconvenient. She resolved to keep her guard up, but her guard betrayed her the moment she attended Lady Penworth's musical. She had barely taken her seat when James appeared beside her. "Miss Fairleigh," he bowed. "I had not realized you were fond of music." "Music is tolerable," she said lightly. "Pretending to enjoy terrible performances is less so." He laughed out loud, something bold in a room full of whispering matrons. "And you?" she asked. "Do you enjoy music, Mr. Redcliffe?" "I enjoy whatever you enjoy." She stiffened. "Flattery will not serve you." "It is not flattery," he said simply. It is truth. She did not trust it, but she felt it. When the violinist began playing, a thin, reedy sound that made Charlotte wince, James leaned toward her and whispered, "If I fall asleep, please pinch me." She smothered a laugh. "I shall do no such thing." "Then you will let me scandalize the ton by snoring through the performance." "The temptation is great," she murmured. Their shoulders brushed. The sound of the violin blurred into nothing. Something unspoken, warm and electric, lingered in the space between them. Later that evening, when James offered her his arm to escort her to her waiting carriage, she accepted without hesitation, which was precisely when Mr. Hartley stepped into their path. "Redcliffe," Edward nodded stiffly. "Miss Fairleigh." Charlotte extended a polite greeting. James sensed the shift instantly, how Edward's gaze lingered on Charlotte with a touch of admiration, how he straightened, as though preparing to make conversation. A tightening sensation coiled in James's chest. He did not like it. Edward was his friend, his oldest friend. But suddenly, the wager felt different. Wrong. And seeing Edward look at Charlotte as though she were merely a challenge made James's blood heat. When Edward asked Charlotte whether she would be attending Lady Westbury's picnic the next day, James felt a flare of something he recognized with irritation. Jealousy. Charlotte noticed James's sudden silence. When she climbed into the carriage, she held his gaze a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Good evening, Mr. Redcliffe." He bowed. "Good evening, Miss Fairleigh." The door closed, her carriage rolled away, and James stood on the pavement, the night air cool against skin that felt suddenly fever-warm. He was in trouble. The following morning, he told Edward he wanted to end the wager. They stood in whites, the scent of tobacco and leather drowning the polite murmur of gentlemen in discussion. Edward stared at him in disbelief. "End it? After only a week?" "Yes." James folded his arms. "I want no part of it." Edward laughed. "Because you are losing?" "Because it is wrong." Edward's smile faded. "You are joking." "No." "You know the rules," Edward snapped. "A gentleman's bet is binding." James bristled. "A gentleman's bet made in foolishness." "And are you so invested, Redcliffe, that you cannot bear to see her spend time with someone else?" The question hit its mark. Edward's expression sharpened. "Good God, you have feelings." James did not answer. Edward stepped closer. "You were the one always untouched, unbothered, immune to attachment. And now this?" James clenched his jaw. "She is not a wager. She deserves better." "And you think I do not?" Edward retorted. "You forget that I have admired Charlotte Fairleigh since the first ball of the season." James froze. Edward smiled tightly. "You didn't know that, did you? But do not worry. I intend to win fairly." James's stomach dropped like a stone. This was no longer a jest to Edward. This was real. "I withdraw," James repeated quietly. "I will not compete." Edward's smirk returned. "Withdraw, if you wish. But the wager remains, and I will not step aside simply because you have fallen in love." James stiffened. "I never." "Spare me," Edward said. "I can see it in your eyes." With that, Edward walked away. James remained where he stood, staring at the polished floorboards, fighting the strangest mix of guilt and longing he had ever known. He cared for Charlotte. Deeply. Dangerously. And he had begun their acquaintance on a lie. He had to tell her. Soon. Before someone else did. Chapter 3. The truth between them. Charlotte Fairleigh had never been so thoroughly unsettled by a gentleman. Facts she knew. James Redcliffe made her laugh, and James Redcliffe listened to her as though her thoughts mattered. James Redcliffe looked at her, not at her beauty or her fortune, but at her, and that was the problem. She could not afford to be swept into admiration of a man known throughout London for casual charm. Her aunt had warned her more than once. Mr. Redcliffe is delightful, yes, but he has no heart to give. Charlotte disagreed. She suspected he had too much heart, but hid it under layers of nonchalance. Still, she kept her wits about her, or so she believed. It was during Lady Westbury's picnic at Hyde Park that everything began to unravel. The weather was fine, the sky clear, the grass dotted with blankets and baskets. Ladies wandered with parasols. Gentlemen stood in clusters discussing horses, politics, and wagers, always wagers. When Charlotte and her chaperone reached the gathering, James was already waiting. "Miss Fairleigh," he said, bowing, "I had hoped you would come." "And why is that?" she asked, though she knew. "Because I have discovered that my day is considerably improved when shared with you." Her breath caught for just a moment before she regained composure. He offered her his arm. "Walk with me." She hesitated, aware of eyes watching, but she wanted to, so very much. "Yes," she said softly, "I will." They strolled down a shaded path lined with elm trees. The scent of grass and distant water filled the air. Charlotte glanced at him. "You seem distracted today." "I am," he admitted. "May I ask why?" James paused. "There is something I should tell you." Her steps slowed. "Something serious." "Yes." She waited. James opened his mouth, then froze. Because from behind them, a voice called brightly, "Miss Fairleigh, what a lovely surprise." Edward Hartley, smiling, confident, far too pleased with himself. Charlotte's eyes flicked between the two men. Something cold and uneasy stirred in her chest. Edward continued, "Redcliffe, old friend, I see you've secured the first walk." James's entire body went rigid. Charlotte's brows drew together. "First walk?" Edward grinned, oblivious to the storm gathering. "Yes, our wager, of course, though I suppose I must congratulate Redcliffe on being ahead." Silence fell with a thundering crash. Charlotte stared at James. James stared back, pale. Edward belatedly realized he'd erred. "Miss Fairleigh, I meant no insult. I merely—" "Explain," Charlotte said, voice ice cold, every syllable cutting. James stepped forward. "Charlotte, Miss Fairleigh, please, if you will allow me—" "A wager?" Her eyes burned. "You approached me because of a wager." "No." James shook his head. "It began that way, yes, but that is not—" Her voice sharpened. "How long has this game been going on?" James swallowed. "A week." "And how am I to interpret your attentions during that week?" He felt gutted, as genuine. She laughed, a bitter, quiet sound. "Genuine? Mr. Redcliffe, do you take me for a fool?" "Charlotte, I swear—" "Do not say my name," she snapped. Edward stepped back, his expression reflecting dawning guilt. "Miss Fairleigh, I assure you—" "You assure me of nothing," she said, turning on him. "The pair of you have humiliated me. Publicly, no doubt. I have heard of ridiculous wagers among gentlemen, but I did not imagine I would become the subject of one." James tried again. "Please, I wanted to tell you, today, in fact—" "Oh?" Her voice trembled with fury. "Before or after you won?" The question carved a wound he felt down to his soul. "Miss Fairleigh," he said softly, "I am sorry." Her posture stiffened to regal, icy perfection. "I will not see either of you again," she said. "Good day." She turned and walked away without another glance. James did not breathe. Edward muttered, "Redcliffe, I—" I didn't think—" "Leave," James said quietly. "James, leave." Edward stepped back, regret flickering across his features before he walked away. James remained on the path, staring at the empty space where Charlotte had stood. The sunlight seemed colder, the world smaller. He had lost her, and he had done it with his own folly. Charlotte did not cry, not in her carriage. Not once she reached home. Not even when her aunt asked if she was well. Instead, she retreated to the library, closed the door, and pressed her back against the cool wood. She felt betrayed, by her own judgment as much as by James. She had allowed herself to believe he was different. How foolish, how painfully naive. She sank into a chair, staring at the rows of books her father had once cherished. "I will not be made a spectacle," she whispered. "Never again." But her voice wobbled. Because beneath the anger lay a deeper hurt. She had begun to care for him, and that made the betrayal unbearable. Chapter 4. What the Heart Knows. James Redcliffe had survived duels, gambling debts, and the fury of disappointed lovers. But nothing had ever hollowed him out like losing Charlotte Fairleigh's trust. For 2 days he did not sleep. He sent no notes. He attended no parties. He walked the length of London, imagining the things he should have said, the confession he should have delivered sooner, the unguarded truth of his feelings. He finally resolved to call at her home. Her aunt, Mrs. Revington, met him in the drawing-room with arms folded. "No," she said before he spoke a single word. "I beg your pardon." "No. You may not see her, you may not speak to her, you may not stand on this rug a moment longer." James exhaled shakily. "Mrs. Revington, please. I must explain." "She knows everything she needs to know." "She knows the worst," James said quietly. "But she does not know that I love her." The older woman blinked. He continued, voice low and raw. "I thought I understood myself. I thought I was incapable of feeling so deeply. But she changed that. She changed me. I cannot let her believe she is merely a wager." Mrs. Revington's expression softened. Not fully, but enough for hope to flicker. "She is hurt," she said, "and she is proud." "I know. And she will not receive you." "I suspected as much." "Then why come?" "Because," he said, "she deserves the truth, even if it changes nothing." Mrs. Revington studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come back tomorrow morning," she said. "If her anger has cooled, slightly, I may persuade her to hear you. I make no promises." James bowed with desperate gratitude. "Thank you." Charlotte slept poorly. Her dreams were haunted by James's eyes, honest, earnest, pained. She hated those dreams nearly as much as she hated remembering the warmth of his laughter. On the morning her aunt told her he had come, her first instinct was outrage. "He came here?" "Yes." "I shall not see him." Mrs. Revington raised an eyebrow. "He claims he loves you." Charlotte froze. Her heart throbbed painfully. Foolish thing. "Doesn't matter," she muttered. "He lied." "He made a foolish wager, yes. But perhaps," her aunt said gently, "a man's worst mistake reveals his best intentions when he tries to set it right." Charlotte swallowed hard. "I cannot—" "Just hear him," her aunt interrupted, "if only to free your mind of the question that has been tormenting you." Charlotte looked away, blinking rapidly. "Yes," she whispered. James arrived precisely at 10. Charlotte sat in the drawing-room, posture stiff, trying to appear composed despite her racing heart. He entered slowly, as though afraid the slightest misstep might shatter the moment. "Miss Fairleigh," he said, bowing. "Mr. Redcliffe." The silence was brittle. James took a breath. "Thank you for receiving me." "My aunt insisted I hear you. That is all." He nodded. I understand. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. Say what you must. James stepped forward, then stopped himself, choosing instead to remain at a respectful distance. Charlotte, he said softly, the wager was real. I will not insult you with denial. It was foolish, cruel, even if unintentionally, and I regret it more than I have regretted anything in my life. She stared at him, expression carved from stone. But, he continued, voice trembling, everything that happened after our first dance, every conversation, every moment, I swear to you, those were real. You must know that. How could I possibly know? She asked quietly. You are, you. A man with reputation, charm, and the ability to lie without blinking. He flinched. I deserve that. Perhaps worse. She looked away, jaw tightening. James continued more urgently. Charlotte, I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you. I cannot explain it. It is not infatuation, not a chase. It is... He exhaled shakily. It is love. Unwanted, unplanned, overwhelming. Her chest tightened. He kept going, as if the words spilled without permission. When Edward called to you that day in the park, I wanted to step between you, to shield you from the very wager I had helped create. I hated myself for it. That is why I tried to tell you. I was too late. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the tears that formed unbidden. She despised tears. James saw them and looked agonized. If you cannot forgive me, I will accept it. If you never wish to see me again, I will step aside. But I beg you, believe that I love you, and that losing you would ruin me more completely than any disgrace. Silence. The clock ticked mercilessly. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice no more than a whisper. Why did you not end it sooner? The wager. I tried. His voice cracked. Edward refused, and I feared telling you too soon would send you away before I had a chance to prove myself. So you waited, she said. He bowed his head. Yes. Too long. Yes. Another long silence swelled between them, heavy, suffocating. Then Charlotte rose from her chair. James tensed. She walked to the window, her back to him, hands gripping the sill. I am not a fragile woman, she said slowly. I do not fall easily. But when I do, I fall deeply. James's breath caught. When I realized I was beginning to care for you, she continued, I tried to ignore it, to remind myself of your reputation, to hold on to my sense. But her voice wavered. I liked you. James closed his eyes. And then I discovered it was all a game. It was never a game, he whispered. She turned. Her eyes glistened with anger and hurt and something else, something fragile. Do you still see me as a prize to be won, Mr. Redcliffe? No, he said fiercely. I see you as the woman I want to honour, to choose, to fight for. Charlotte drew a slow breath. And what of Mr. Hartley? She asked. I no longer speak to him. She blinked. You ended the friendship. I ended the wager, he corrected. He ended the friendship. Her expression softened, just a fraction. James dropped to one knee, unexpected even to himself. Charlotte's eyes widened. Charlotte Fairleigh, he said, voice trembling. I do not deserve it. But if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, someday, I will spend the rest of my life making amends. Not a proposal, not yet, but a vow, a plea, a truth. Charlotte stared at him for a long, shattering moment. Then, very slowly, she reached out her hand. James rose and took it, gently, reverently. I am still angry, she murmured. I would be disappointed if you weren't. She almost smiled. Almost. But, she continued quietly, I do believe you. James exhaled a breath he had been holding for days. Thank you, he whispered. She nodded once. Do not make me regret it. Never. The season buzzed for weeks with rumours of Miss Fairleigh turning away her suitors, of Mr. Redcliffe abandoning Whites, of Mr. Hartley sulking bitterly. But London is often wrong. What was true was simpler. James called on Charlotte every day, always with sincerity, never with assumption. Charlotte allowed him to walk with her in the gardens, then to take tea, then to meet her uncle. Slowly, carefully, trust rebuilt itself like a fragile glass sculpture. One afternoon, as they strolled along the Serpentine, Charlotte spoke softly. Do you still regret the wager? Every day. Good. She looked up at him. That means you remember what you almost lost. He smiled a little. How could I forget? They walked in silence for a moment before she said, James? Yes. I think I may be ready to forgive you fully. His breath caught. Truly? She stopped walking. When he turned to face her, she lifted her hand to his cheek, a tender, surprising gesture. Truly. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. When he opened them, she was smiling, soft, warmer than he had ever seen. He took her hands. Charlotte, he said, voice thick with emotion. I love you. And I love you, she whispered. The kiss that followed was gentle, cautious at first, then deepening as certainty replaced doubt. The wager that had begun with arrogance ended with humility and love. 3 months later, beneath the golden glow of early autumn, James Redcliffe asked Charlotte Fairleigh to marry him. She said yes. And London, for once, had nothing to gossip about. For theirs was not a story of scandal, it was a story of how a gentleman learned honour, how a clever woman learned to trust, and how love outlasted the most foolish wager ever made in a ballroom. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.